Alexander's chemistry research turned out to be a catastrophe due to its flesh-eating property, although it will get to see some use. When it comes to the Guardian's left-behind residue standing in the way, this recipe will prove to be a godsend. Finally, nothing stands in the way of reaching the castle's distillery, currently also referred to as the refinery. Upon entering the isolated atmosphere surrounding the refinery, Daniel is greeted by sheer darkness. Another auditory flashback forces its way, hinting that all light sources were out even back then.
It sure is dark in here.
Yes, and there's a good reason for it. But you can light the lamp now if you wish.
What's the reason? For the darkness, that is.
Stay close. Be careful not to stray.
What's the reason? Why is it so dark?
Pay attention, Daniel. It's important that you keep going straight and make sure not to stray.
The Baron avoids the topic at hand by requesting that Daniel sticks to him and follows a certain path. Does the Baron have something to hide in the refinery? Does he not want Daniel to witness something? Daniel is instructed to only walk straight ahead and keep focused. I have 3 theories as to why the refinery is so dark. Theory 1. The darkness might be in order to camouflage the true look of the servants working for the Baron, as their appearance is certainly hard to explain and justify. An example of this is shown shortly when only the mere silhouette of a servant can be seen ahead. Theory number 2. It is later hinted that the Guardian's presence sometimes can invoke an unnatural darkness, as seen later in one of the main storage sections. Theory number 3. It might be one way to slow down the Guardian, judging by how Alexander openly says there is a good reason for the darkness. Also note that unlike the wine cellar and the nearby laboratory, there are no windows, allowing no natural light for the area. Perhaps this makes it harder for the Guardian to enter. A loud hiss can be heard through the ceiling and walls. Through the gaps of the wooden planks, a nasty growth of flesh is low-key visible and has eaten up the real wall behind. The crude passageway is in poor condition and leads into the distillery hall. The dark environment is reduced to mere silhouettes. Seen staggering through the hall is a servant. This dreadful moment is personally where I had to pinch myself when playing the game for the first time. Is it real? Is it a hallucination? Or even, am I playing a horror game? Or am I dreaming? The servant's journey ends here, however. The Guardian lets out a fierce roar, and all that is left of the mindless lackey are blood and limbs. If you pay close attention, events of the past can be heard, like dogs whining and humans crying. Sins of the past is being forced into Daniel's present mind. A door suddenly opens ahead. An otherworldly exhale can be heard. It is as if the Guardian is helping Daniel along the way. Daniel's closing diary entry for his journey to Africa rests on a table nearby. It mentions him being returned home after being victim of the unfortunate event. The broken orb pieces which were brought home with him are being questioned, as they do not seem to fit together at all.
22nd of June, 1839. It's been more than a month since my last entry. After the event inside the underground chamber in Algeria, Professor Herbert insisted I return to England. He said he didn't want to risk forfeiting the entire expedition lest I took a turn for the worse. An excessive decision, in retrospect. But I'm glad it turned out that way. I found my journal this morning in the haphazard collection of things brought home from Africa. Next to it lay the broken stone orb wrapped in cloth. I tried to assemble it, but couldn't. The pieces wouldn't fit together, as if they weren't from the same object. Could I have imagined it all? Was there ever a complete orb?
Venturing through, Daniel recovers yet another diary entry, although before it can be reached, there's banging on the door ahead. Immediately after, the back door is fiercely slammed shut, greatly challenging Daniel's bravery and sanity. After initially concluding the diary, Daniel decided to keep adding entries. He enthusiastically accepts the quest on figuring out the mysterious orb, and thus the documentation must go on.
25th of June, 1839. I feel the need to continue this journal, even though it was intended for my journey to Africa. This must be something very important. I just know it. I've taken it upon myself to piece the orb back together, but it's been more difficult than one might think. The pieces are behaving strangely. They seem to change color, shape, and texture, but ever so slightly. Yesterday, I took careful measurements and notated any significant markings. Today, I confirmed my suspicions. They were changing. I was terrified and rushed off to see the finest geologist in London, Sir William Smith. I approached the subject with care and we discussed how rocks change form. He told me about the nature of glass, how it eventually collapses on itself, like ice slowly melting over the course of centuries. Smith eased my mind a bit, but I can't escape the feeling that these shards have otherworldly properties.
There is an opening in a wall, allowing Daniel to crouch through to an otherwise inaccessible room. There's a hatch, sealing access to the cellar archives. The crank for the hatch is stuck due to a stick purposely jammed into a pulley in the ceiling. This obstruction may be pulled on until it snaps in half. Other means of brute force should also do the trick. The hatch reveals its secret, and Daniel is free to move on, although this does mark a point of no return. The Guardian roars, and something bad is about to happen. A second roar is emitted, much louder and more fierce, and all the lights are blown out. Daniel has now made it to the cellar archives, albeit damaged by water leakage this time around due to a reckless otherworldly beast. This section is notorious to many players of the game, and for a good reason, as danger not only lurks ahead, it lurks head on. My first time playing, I thought this was an invisible humanoid caretaker at first, as the splashes can come off as human running steps. This is, however, none other than a Karunk, a water-dwelling creature from the Baron's homeworld. Good news is that its reach outside of water is usually limited. The bad news is that it's very patient and hungry. A gate ahead blocks further passage. A lever will open the gate, for a limited time. Why such a mechanism was constructed in the first place is weird. The terrifying servants stagger and tend to be slow. Perhaps Alexander didn't want them to mindlessly wander from the refinery area and ahead. After all, the guest room is at the other end. Impeccable timing of the gate shows that the water dwellers aren't immortal. but sadly, there are more of them. Severed limbs scattered about serve as a feast and decoy. Could it be that servants were roaming in here, and the Guardian maimed them? Pigs are also hanging from the ceiling. It's as if they are attached to the fleshy residue, possibly appeared along with it, and thus entirely out of place. A juicy lunch distracts the invisible predators for just long enough for Daniel to open another gate. The door ahead is locked, but the lock is near broken and can be picklocked with a hollow needle found in the same room. Thank God for that. The archive's tunnels are not only flooded, but also mostly covered by red flesh. There is a weird, subtle ambience going on, and you know what they say, it's quiet before the storm. The Guardian's impatient roar can be heard from a crack in the wall, and an infernal red light shines through, as if it's a gate from hell. A large, invisible being emerges from behind, immediately giving chase, while the Guardian cheers it on. Hoping for a little reach out of water is not an option. This water dweller is much, much larger than the others, which means that Daniel can only do one thing: run! The sections hastily traversed feel like a maze. What if there's a dead end? A door shows up at the end, leading away from a flooded environment. After fleeing for his life, Daniel reaches what can only be described as a sanctuary. A calm and welcoming environment harmonizes with a safe atmosphere. The back hall has been reached. Enjoy it as much as you can though, Daniel, as this is only a temporary reprieve. It should also be worth noting that depending on where you go next, you're going to be experiencing the biggest contrast between a safe haven and a nightmare ever. I am, of course, referring to Castle Brennerburg's main storage facility, which will be explored in more detail in an upcoming episode. Believe me, that place right there is the literal epicenter of what evil roams in this castle, and I can't wait to regret revisiting it. At this point, a track will also start playing, indicating that you now reached 1/3 of the story. This also plays once reaching the cistern at the 2/3 mark.